What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
Every Christmas, my family sends out a card. A big, glossy, perfectly staged card, the kind where everyone's in matching sweaters, someone's holding a golden retriever. And the front yard is sprinkled with fake snow even though they live in suburban Georgia where it hasn't snowed on December 25th since Clinton was in office. There's always a pun in the caption, something painfully wholesome like "slay all day with the Monroes" or "joy, love, and too much eggnog." And somewhere near the bottom, under a few too many exclamation points, it reads, "Wishing you love from Dean, Marla, Chelsea, Travis, and the grandbabies." And just like that, I'm missing. Again. Not a mention. Not even a nod. It's not subtle. It never has been. The worst part? They send me a copy. Every damn year. Like clockwork. Arrives right after Thanksgiving, like some twisted tradition, as if they're saying, "Look what a family looks like, Rachel. Look how clean it can be when we scrub you out." For a while, I kept them. Stuffed them into a drawer like little time capsules of rejection. And then, maybe 5 years ago, I stopped. Tossed them straight into the trash, still sealed. But even then, I could picture it all. The same fake smiles, the same staged warmth, the same deliberate omission. It didn't always used to be like this. There was a time, not that long ago, though it feels like a few lifetimes have passed, when I was in those photos too. When I stood next to Chelsea in our matching red scarves, when I helped decorate the tree at Mom's place, when Dad used to give me those stiff little pats on the back like he wasn't totally sure what to do with a daughter who wanted more than casseroles and a corner office. Then came the year I blew it all up. Or at least, that's how they like to frame it. I was 24, fresh out of grad school, or close enough. Engaged to a man they hated from the start, a guy with tattoos, a loud laugh, and a motorcycle helmet that spent more time on my kitchen counter than on his head. We got married fast, we fought faster, and within 18 months, I was divorced, broke, and back in a tiny apartment with peeling paint and a landlord who believed air conditioning was a luxury, not a utility. And just like that, my role shifted. I went from daughter to disappointment. From family to liability. They didn't cut me off, not really. They just started editing me out. Quietly. Efficiently. Like I was a stain on the family brand. I remember the first Christmas after the divorce. Chelsea had just had her second baby, and the card that year showed her husband holding both kids while she beamed at the camera like a Hallmark movie poster. Travis was in the corner with his girlfriend, now wife, looking blandly handsome, as always. And me? I got a copy in the mail, addressed to Ms. Rachel Monroe. No note, no smiley face, just a photo and a caption that read, "Feeling blessed beyond measure." The measure, it seemed, stopped right before it reached me. Over time, they perfected the art of omission. I'd still get invites to things, weddings, birthdays, baby showers, but always late, always with the energy of someone inviting a coworker they secretly can't stand. At Thanksgiving, Chelsea would ask about my job with the kind of smile that screams, "Do you even have one?" And Mom would tell stories about people from church who got their act together, as though their stories were intended for me, and Dad, well, Dad would just nod and keep carving the turkey, pretending not to hear the awkward silences that bloomed like bruises around the table. I built my life outside of it all. Slowly, messily, but with intention. I stopped chasing their approval and started building something that didn't need it. I found work I actually cared about, learned how to breathe in rooms where no one clapped for me, and over time, I started winning. Not the Instagram kind of winning, no dreamy vacations or engagement announcements, but the kind of real, hard-won victories that don't fit neatly in a holiday card. Still, every year, the damn card arrived. Always a little shinier. Always a little smugger. And always, without fail, without me. Until this year. This year, I didn't cry when I opened it. Didn't laugh. Didn't roll my eyes. I just looked at it, all that carefully posed joy, the matching flannel, the big season's greetings from the Monroes, font across the front, and I felt something I hadn't in a long time, amusement. Not sadness. Not anger. Just a slow, blooming sense of, oh okay. So that's the game we're playing. And for the first time in years, I smiled back. Not at them, not at the card, but at the idea that maybe, just maybe, it was time I sent a card of my own. Not to apologize. Not to beg. But to remind them who I am and show them what they missed. There's a moment right after you decide to stop asking for something you've never been given, when the air changes. It's not dramatic, not some movie magic wind shift or thunderclap, but a subtle click inside your own chest, like a rusted lock finally giving way. That's what it felt like the morning after I saw this year's card. I poured my coffee, stood barefoot on the cold tile floor of my kitchen, looked at that glossy piece of familial fiction sitting on my counter, and thought, you know what? Let's play. And it wasn't a tantrum, not some emotional outburst triggered by years of hurt. It was the calmest, most deliberate thing I've ever felt. Not rage. Not bitterness. Just a clean, cool certainty that I was done being edited out of my own story, and that if they weren't going to include me, then I'd just have to rewrite the whole damn narrative myself. The plan didn't come to me in one blinding flash. It showed up in pieces, like puzzle fragments falling out of a drawer I hadn't opened in a while. I knew it had to be elegant, not messy, not loud, not anything they could point at and call dramatic. I didn't want revenge that made me look bitter. I wanted revenge that made them look again. So I started where any woman in my 30s might, with a vision board and a bottle of Merlot. I sat down at my kitchen table, surrounded by empty takeout containers and half-burned holiday candles, and began mapping it all out. What would the card look like? What would it say? Who exactly would get it? Because make no mistake, it wasn't just for my mother and her curated suburbia. It was for every last person on that damn mailing list who'd spent the past decade forwarding their fake family cheer while pretending I didn't exist. I had something they didn't expect. Something they'd never publicly acknowledged because it didn't fit into their narrow idea of success. I had a win, a big one. That year, after slogging through 15 years of contracts, rejections, late nights, and years where I barely made rent, I'd finally broken through in my field. I'd landed a major award, not the kind you can fake or buy, but the kind you earn with calloused hands and sleepless weeks. It was a National Design Award, given out to just one recipient a year, and somehow, impossibly, it had my name on it. My mother had said nothing. Chelsea hadn't even liked the post. But I knew they saw it. Everyone saw it. They just refused to mention it because acknowledging it meant admitting that I'd built something real, alone, without their blessing, without their blueprint, without ever crawling back to ask for a seat at their damn table. So I decided I wouldn't just make a card, I'd make a statement. I called in a favor from a photographer friend, someone who owed me from a branding project last year. We booked a small studio downtown, rented a deep red velvet backdrop that screamed old Hollywood, and I showed up in a black gown with a neckline that would make Chelsea clutch her pearls. I held the trophy in one hand and a glass of champagne in the other. No kids. No partner. No golden retriever. Just me full-framed, unapologetic, and holding the evidence that I'd done something that mattered. The caption came to me while I was in line at the printer shop, surrounded by last-minute shoppers and stressed-out dads holding glitter glue and elf wrapping paper. I scribbled it onto the proof sheet before they ran the final batch. Thanks for the motivation. That was it. No frills. No hashtags. Just 6 words soaked in every slight, every condescending smile, every forced family dinner where I bit my tongue so hard it bled. It was perfect. Cold. Clean. Devastating. A sniper shot wrapped in glossy cardstock. Getting the addresses was easier than I expected. Travis, my brother, the ghost at every family gathering who speaks in polite head nods and whose loyalty is as silent as it is unshakable, had always been neutral, or so I thought. But when I texted him a casual, "Hey, any chance you've got the family Christmas list lying around?" he responded within 5 minutes. No questions. Just an attachment labeled mom_Christmas 2024.xlsx. That was the first time I wondered if maybe, just maybe, someone else in this ridiculous family was just as tired of the bullshit as I was. The list had over 80 names. Distant cousins. Church ladies. Old family friends from Marla's scrapbooking club. People I hadn't spoken to since I was a teenager, but who somehow still sent birthday cards with passive-aggressive scripture quotes. I printed 150 cards, just to be safe, and spent the better part of a weekend handwriting each envelope. No pre-printed labels. No stamps with cartoon reindeer. Just black ink, deliberate cursive, and one name per envelope, Monroe. I walked them to the post office myself. It was the second week of December, cold but not quite freezing, the kind of gray day where even the sidewalks look exhausted. I stood in line behind a woman mailing cookies and a man arguing about shipping insurance, and when it was finally my turn, I handed over the stack like it was evidence in a trial, one I fully intended to win. As I left the post office, I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. What I felt was calm. The kind of calm that comes after you finally stop swallowing your own voice. The kind that tastes like closure and possibility and something sharp on the tip of your tongue. I didn't know how they'd react. I didn't care. This wasn't about them, not really. It was about reclaiming the space they tried to carve me out of. About walking into the room they'd locked me out of and hanging my own damn portrait on the wall. They wanted to pretend I wasn't there? Fine. But this year, they were going to have to look at me. And not just me, the version of me they never got to control. Let's see how merry their Christmas is after this. There's something eerily quiet about waiting for a storm that you've unleashed yourself, like standing at the shoreline after hurling a rock into deep water, eyes fixed on the horizon, bracing for the ripples to hit the banks, knowing full well that the impact might take longer than you'd like, but it's coming, inevitable and precise. In the first few days after I sent out the cards, those 150 little paper bombs dressed as seasonal cheer, the world stayed still, unnaturally still, and for a moment, I wondered if maybe I'd miscalculated. If perhaps the Monroes were more oblivious than I'd given them credit for, if the years of being ignored had been less malicious exclusion and more simple indifference. But I should have known better. My family might be many things: performative, image-obsessed, emotionally stunted, but they're not indifferent. They've always noticed. They've just chosen to pretend they didn't. Until now. The first sign came, of all places, on Facebook, which is poetic in its own sad way. Chelsea, my sister with a never messy bun and the curated grid of Christian mom quotes, holiday cookie reels, and perfectly timed selfies where her teeth look as bleached as her conscience, posted a photo the day after I knew the cards would start arriving. It wasn't anything obvious. She's not foolish enough to respond directly, not publicly, but the caption gave her away. Family isn't always about blood. It's about loyalty. Grateful for mine. No tags. No explanations. Just a photo of her and her kids in front of the Christmas tree, her husband blurry in the background, and a message sharp enough to cut skin if you held it too close. I didn't like it. Didn't comment. Didn't need to. Because Chelsea wasn't posting for strangers, she was posting for me. It was a warning shot, wrapped in a Bible verse and dipped in passive aggression. Classic. But the real proof came later that night, in a group text I'd long been removed from but somehow still had access to through Travis, who, bless his silent soul, had clearly taken a seat on the sidelines of this family war, popcorn in hand. He screenshotted it and sent it to me without comment. A message from our mother to Family Core. Yes, she actually named the group chat that, as if they were running a small company instead of just existing with the same last name, where she wrote, in her usual clipped and chilly tone, some of you may have received an inappropriate Christmas card from Rachel. Please disregard. She is clearly going through something. We are praying for her. I read it 5 times. Not because I didn't understand, but because I wanted to memorize how quickly she'd reduced my deliberate, carefully executed act of defiance to a cry for help. That was always her strategy. Whenever I showed strength she couldn't control, she'd twist it into weakness. Power became instability. Independence became dysfunction. The louder I got, the more unwell she painted me. And yet, there was something frantic in that message, something tight and uneven between the words. She was rattled. Good. Let her rattle. The days that followed brought more subtle signs that the ripple had reached shore. Aunt Janine, who has never met a passive-aggressive meme she didn't like, shared one of those grainy stock image posts that reads like a curse veiled as a prayer. Some people only reach out to spread hurt. Protect your peace. Underneath it, A few of the scrapbooking friends from Mom's church commented things like, "Stay strong, Queen, and don't let the devil use others to steal your joy." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. Suddenly I was the devil, all because I dared to remind them I existed. But not every response was veiled in saccharine toxicity. A few came quietly, between the lines, in ways only someone who'd lived this dynamic could decode. A private message from an old friend of the family, a woman who used to babysit us when we were kids, who now runs an Etsy shop full of homemade soaps and follows me on LinkedIn, slid into my inbox with 4 words, "Saw the card." Damn. No judgment. No sides taken. Just acknowledgement. And honestly, it was the most real thing anyone had said to me in months. And then came the message that made me sit down. Not because it was cruel. Quite the opposite. It was from Travis. He didn't say much, never does. Just sent a photo, my card, propped up on his fireplace mantel, between a stocking and a snow globe, and underneath it, a single word, respect. And I swear I sat there, staring at that image, and something in my chest cracked open. Not with emotion. Not with sadness. But with a sense of being seen, really seen, for the first time in God knows how long. Maybe Travis wasn't as checked out as he seemed. Maybe he'd just been biding his time, waiting for someone else to call bullshit before he joined the mutiny. I didn't respond to him right away. I didn't need to. That photo said everything. But then, just when I thought I could settle into the satisfaction of my move, just as I was starting to taste the victory of unspoken consequences, the phone rang. It was Christmas Eve. Late. I'd just come back from drinks with a few friends who felt more like family than anyone I shared DNA with, and I was still buzzing from the way they'd laughed when I told them what I'd done. The phone buzzed again, insistent, and when I looked at the screen, I froze. It was Chelsea. We hadn't spoken directly in almost a year. Our last interaction was a tense 5 minutes at Thanksgiving, during which she'd handed me a slice of pie and said, "You still live in that apartment, right?" Like I was some wounded animal clinging to life on the outskirts of civilization. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Her voice was clipped, controlled, polite in the way people are when they're boiling underneath. She opened with, "So I got your card." I stayed quiet. She continued, I guess congratulations are in order? For the trophy. And the performance." Still, I said nothing. Then came the line that told me everything I needed to know. "You really embarrassed Mom." There it was. The truth. This wasn't about hurt feelings. It wasn't about family. It was about image. Reputation. Control. I finally spoke, my voice low and steady. "Good. She's been embarrassing me for 15 years. There was a pause. A sharp inhale. And then, something cracked not in me, but in her. Something brittle and exhausted and buried too deep to hide anymore. "Do you think I like it?" she asked, her voice breaking ever so slightly. "Do you think I like being the one who always has to look perfect? Who has to carry it all so she doesn't fall apart?" I didn't know what to say, because for the first time in forever, she wasn't being cruel, she was being honest. And then, just as quickly as she'd cracked, she snapped shut again. "Anyway," she said coldly, "Merry Christmas." And with that, she hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the quiet phone, realizing that maybe the real storm hadn't even started yet. Maybe the card wasn't the climax, just the first gust of wind before the whole facade came crashing down. And I couldn't help but wonder, if Chelsea was cracking, who else might be next? There's a peculiar silence that follows a conversation you didn't expect to happen, not because it was loud or angry or cruel, but because something inside it shifted in a way that you can't quite explain. As if the foundations of a familiar building suddenly groaned under their own weight, giving you a glimpse of just how hollow it's always been beneath the surface. After Chelsea's voice cut off and the call ended with a stinging finality, I sat on the edge of my couch, phone still in my hand, feeling the echo of her words move through the room like steam rising off pavement after a long storm. She hadn't called to yell. She hadn't called to apologize. She'd called to leak, not information, but emotion, tightly packed and long concealed. And now that it had escaped her, now that a crack had finally appeared in the polished shell of perfection she'd worn for decades, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I made tea, not because I wanted it, but because it gave my hands something to do, some small ritual to distract from the buzzing in my ears. I let the water boil too long, forgot the timer, and when I finally poured it, the mug burned my palm, but I didn't care. All I could hear was her voice, not the part where she tried to scold me, not even the part where she echoed my mother's favorite phrase, "You embarrass Mom," which, to be fair, had always been their real cardinal sin, but the part she didn't mean to say. The part that slipped out like blood from a wound she didn't know she had. Do you think I like it? I'd spent so many years angry at Chelsea, and with good reason. She'd been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, whose mistakes were rewritten into charming anecdotes, while mine became permanent evidence of failure. She got drunk at homecoming and threw up in the church parking lot, and Mom laughed about it for years like it was some rite of passage. I skipped a family barbecue to recover from a panic attack, and I was labeled disrespectful, ungrateful, possibly mentally unstable. Chelsea got pregnant 3 months before her wedding, no judgment, just a quick adjustment to the ceremony and a fresh monogram bib at the baby shower. I, meanwhile, married a man they didn't like and divorced him even faster, and that was enough to exile me for life. It had always been like that. She was the trophy, and I was the cautionary tale. But now, for the first time, I started to wonder whether that trophy shine had been choking her just as much as my rejection had suffocated me. What kind of life do you live when your worth is measured entirely by how well you hold up the family myth? When every smile has to be tight enough to hide the exhaustion behind it? When failure isn't just discouraged, but unthinkable, a threat to the entire house of cards built on appearance and approval? Maybe Chelsea wasn't free. Maybe she never had been. Maybe we'd both been trapped in different cells inside the same family prison, hers gilded and mine forgotten. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I called her. Not out of obligation, not even because I wanted to connect, but because the silence between us had become too loud, too saturated with things unsaid. She didn't answer at first. Let it ring 6 times, long enough for me to consider hanging up. But then, just as the voicemail clicked in, her voice came through. She sounded tired. Not physically, but emotionally. Like someone who'd been holding their breath for months and finally let a little air escape. She didn't say hello. Just, "You caught me at a weird time." I told her that made 2 of us. We didn't speak in full sentences right away. It was like 2 people walking along a frozen lake, testing the ice with each step, afraid one wrong word might send us both plunging into waters too cold to survive. But eventually, something thawed. She told me the picture-perfect family life had become a job she never applied for, that the kids were great but exhausting, that her husband had grown distant in that quiet, polite way men do when they start to mistake routine for love, that sometimes she stood in her kitchen and felt like a ghost in her own house. She admitted quietly, with a tone almost ashamed, that she had considered walking away more than once, but every time she got close, our mother would show up with a casserole and a guilt trip, reminding her how lucky she was, how proud the family was, how important it was to set an example for the younger women. I didn't interrupt. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't say anything at all, because I realized I wasn't hearing my sister complain, I was hearing her confess. And then, because we're us, because vulnerability is always a risk in our world, she suddenly shifted tones and said, "But look, I'm fine. It's not like I'm falling apart." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so heartbreakingly familiar. That need to backpedal. To retreat into the narrative. To close the wound before anyone else sees it. I told her I didn't send the card to hurt anyone, not really. That I didn't expect a parade or applause, that I just couldn't take another year of being erased. I told her it wasn't even about Mom, or the stupid card tradition, or anyone else on that ridiculous mailing list. It was about finally stepping into my own life with both feet and refusing to shrink to fit someone else's story. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You were always the brave one." I just pretended better. And just like that, the dynamic cracked. For a moment, we weren't the prodigal daughter and the perfect one. We were just two women, two sisters, who had both been shaped and scarred by the same storm, in different ways, and who were finally seeing each other without the fog of comparison and resentment. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if Chelsea and I will suddenly become close, or if this moment will collapse back into silence once the holiday passes. I don't know if Mom will ever acknowledge what she's done, or if she'll retreat even further into her carefully constructed world of prayer chains and sugar cookies. But for the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm yelling into a void. Someone heard me. Someone cracked. And if Chelsea, of all people, can question the foundation, then maybe, just maybe, the whole house is starting to shift. There's a weight that settles in your chest after a confrontation you didn't seek, but couldn't avoid, a kind of quiet ache that doesn't come from pain exactly, but from the recognition that something has permanently shifted between you and a person you once thought you understood. After that phone call with Chelsea, after her voice wavered and then snapped back into place like a rubber band stretched too far, I sat alone in my apartment with the soft hum of the heater and the blinking of the microwave clock in the dark. And for the first time that month, maybe the first time all year, I didn't feel angry or vindicated or triumphant. I just felt still. Not peaceful. Not broken. Just still in that strange, empty way that comes when you've said everything you needed to say, and now all that's left is waiting to see what echoes back. I didn't expect a response. Not from anyone else. Not from the parts of the family still firmly wrapped in the Monroe mythology, where image outweighs intention and silence is preferred to discomfort. Chelsea's crack, if it could even be called that, felt like an anomaly, a strange moment of weakness that would likely be covered up by the next Sunday brunch with a fresh coat of lip gloss and a new prayer about grace in the face of chaos. But I didn't care. I had done what I set out to do. I had sent my message. I had mailed 150 little declarations of survival, one by one, and I had no regrets. That's why, when my phone rang on Christmas morning, the sun not yet up, the city outside still quiet, like it, too, was holding its breath, I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. The name that lit up the display didn't make sense at first. It had been so long since he'd called me directly that I assumed it was a mistake, a pocket dial or some group call gone wrong. But it wasn't. It was real. It was him. Dad. His voice, when it came through, was as I remembered, low, slightly hesitant, as if every word had to pass through a filter of caution before making it to the surface. For years, my father had played the part of the observer, the background character in the family drama who never raised his voice, never contradicted my mother, never asked questions that required uncomfortable answers. He carved turkeys. He nodded politely. He handed out cash in birthday cards with a kind of quiet detachment that made it clear he didn't know what else to offer. And maybe, for most of my life, I'd accepted that silence as his version of love, reserved, distant, but still present in the only way he knew how. But this call was different. He didn't open with pleasantries. He didn't ask how I was or mention the weather or pretend it was a normal call. He just said, "Your mother is upset." That sentence, flat and heavy, landed with the kind of practiced exhaustion that made it clear I wasn't the first person he delivered this news to. I didn't say anything at first. I just let the silence sit between us, thick and unyielding. Then he added, "But I saw the card." Still I waited. "And I get it," he said finally, the words coming slower now, each one feeling like it had to be dragged out of him. "You didn't deserve what happened. You deserve to be in the picture." Something about that sentence, its simplicity, its starkness, struck a chord in me that I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't an apology, not really. It wasn't dramatic or emotional or drenched in regret. But it was honest. And that alone made it feel more valuable than anything else he could have said. I felt my throat tighten, not from sadness, but from the strange ache of being recognized by someone who had looked away for far too long. I asked him why he was calling now, after all this time, after all these years of letting Mom lead every interaction, shape every story, decide who was welcome and who wasn't. His answer was quiet but clear. "Because this time," he said, "I realized I didn't have to agree with her." It was the closest thing to rebellion I'd ever heard from him. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the beginning of something different. Or maybe it was just a moment, a blip of clarity before the old habits returned. I didn't know, but I thanked him softly and told him I appreciated the call. We didn't make plans. We didn't talk about seeing each other. But for the first time in over a decade, we ended a conversation without resentment curdling in the air. Later that day, after the sun had risen and the world had begun its usual Christmas rituals, the carols, the casserole dishes, the awkward family jokes recycled for the 1,000th time, I walked down to the front door of my building and found a small package waiting for me. It had no return address. Just my name in handwriting I recognized, but couldn't quite place. Inside was a frame. Not just any frame, a heavy, beveled glass one, the kind you don't buy on accident. And inside it was the card. My card. The one I'd sent. And on the back, a note, short and handwritten in Travis's unmistakable, all-capital scrawl. You did this. For real. Be proud. I stood there for a long time, holding that frame like it was a trophy in itself, a symbol not just of the card but of the long, brutal path that led to it, of the years I'd spent questioning my worth, measuring my value against people who never saw me clearly, who didn't even try. I brought it inside and hung it on my fridge, right next to a magnet I'd picked up at a thrift shop years ago that said, "Family is who claps when you win." I used to think that was cheesy. Now it felt like scripture. And maybe that's where the story ends, not with reconciliation or redemption or the sudden unraveling of a lifetime of dysfunction, but with something quieter, something more real. A fracture acknowledged, a silence broken. A few words spoken too late, but still better than never. I didn't send the card because I needed validation. I sent it because I needed the truth to live somewhere outside of me, in ink and image and mailboxes they couldn't ignore. So when the phone rings again next year, if it rings at all, maybe things will be different. Maybe not. But one thing is certain. This year, I made my own damn card. And I mailed it to every single person who ever tried to pretend I wasn't worth including. And on the front, I wasn't smiling out of spite or sadness or some desperate plea for recognition. I was smiling because I finally saw myself clearly, and I didn't care if they ever did.